Welcome to Back to the Father, a show about the journey of life focused on our final end, which is God Himself, our loving Father. And now, here's your host, Dave Palmer.
Welcome, everybody, to Back to the Father here on the Guadalupe Radio Network. This is a show where we laser focus in on the teachings of St. Thomas Aquinas, especially in his Summa Theologia. And, you know, that's one of the cool things about being Catholic, and actually one of the kind of exasperating things, if I'm honest with myself, is that there's so much. You know, the faith is so deep, and we have the history and the saints and all these different devotions, and sometimes you just kind of got to focus in on one of them. And I know people that they're all about divine mercy, or they're all about Saint Therese of Lisieux, or they're all about, Carlo Acutis, the Eucharistic miracles. And we need all that. You know, we need people to focus on particular aspects of the faith and then bring it to people, and then people can decide whether they might have an affinity for that particular devotion as well. And that's what I do, and that's what I've been doing for about 11 years now, because ever since I picked up the Summa Theologia and started reading it, I thought, this is what I love. You know, this is my thing. And so I appreciate very much the opportunity here on Guadalupe Radio Network once a week to come to you and share a little bit of my knowledge and expertise of the Summa Theologia, and also hear back from you, get a little feedback from you. And we like to make this a chat rather than a monologue. You'll notice that Sissel's not with us. Sissel's not in today. She, of course, yesterday was the 4th of July, and she had a little issue that she had to deal with, and so she's not here. But you know what? We have a good bench. It's like they say in sports. If one person's out, somebody else jumps in, and they know exactly what to do. And so we have none other than Joe Loney.
Well, it is a bench, but we don't know how good it is.
We have somebody.
Yes.
When you have the last name Loney, you know what you're doing. Okay.
Sometimes.
About
50% of the time. 50% of the time.
Of the Loneys?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, if your name's Joe Loney, you know what you're doing. Yeah. So when you're Kent Loney's son, you probably have some knowledge of these kind of things. So thanks to Joe Loney for filling in. Before we get to the topic, well, I'll tell you the topic, and then I'm going to take a couple of little excursions, and then we'll get back to the topic. How's that? Back to the topic, back to the Father. The topic today is going to be the existence of God. And I sometimes think like, this topic, because if there's one part of the Summa that pretty much everybody's heard of, like if you've read an article of the Summa, it's probably this one about the 5 proofs for the existence of God. But I would challenge you, not necessarily Joe, because I'm not going to put him on the spot. I would challenge you, dear listeners and viewers out there, could you rattle off the 5 proofs for the existence of God? And I say that because there's like a major problem in our culture today of people not believing in God, which I find really wild, because even in the worst times of my moral life, the times when, I really, really went astray, and there certainly were times like that in my 20s and 30s, I never stopped believing in God, and I always felt kind of bad about what I was doing, but my passions and my sin took over in my life, but I never stopped believing in God. I could never even convince myself there wasn't a God, just so I could go on living, as I was living. And I know, Joe, I interviewed you recently for the Sherathon, and I know when you were about 21, you kind of went on a different track for a little while, and now you're coming back. Did you ever just not stop believing in God, or did it ever get that bad, or did you just kind of abandon the faith, the Catholic faith?
It would be more of an abandon of the faith. I think at sometimes when something really bad was happening, it's a lot easier to say God isn't there.
Yeah, I know.
Not, and that's just kind of how it was for me. But it wasn't like a burning thought like God is not here.
Yeah, it's weird though, because when things are going really, really well in your life, let's say you're making a lot of money and everything's just kind of falling into line.
Not really thinking about God.
Yeah, exactly. And you could almost think like, you know what? I don't think God's doing this. I'm doing this,
Yeah.
man. I'm
earning this.
I'm the bomb. Yeah. And so, but then when things are really bad, like when I was talking on the last program with Jerry Jacob about all the evil in the world, and a lot of people would be like, look at the child abuse and look at terrorism and look at all these, shootings. And I mean, even recently, just a couple miles from here, there was a shooting at Chick-fil-A.
Yeah.
Of all places, Chick-fil-A, and you just think like, nothing really seems to make sense, and that's probably the biggest reason why people don't believe in God is they suffer a personal tragedy, or they get a divorce, or a child dies, or something like that, and they're just like, no good God would allow this to happen, and so we talked about that in the last show, but all right, so
Thank you, Lori, for joining us on YouTube. I always see your name in the chat.
Yeah, Lori, welcome back, Lori. Thanks for being here. We are on YouTube. We're on X. I'm trying not to say, formerly Twitter.
It's been X for a little bit.
It's
but
hard to talk about X.
I think it'll always be Twitter for me. I'm
yeah,
sorry.
I know.
I can't.
And if you go to twitter.com, you still go there.
Is
you know
it?
that?
They,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah. I think even Elon Musk is like, man, I really
It's
messed
still
up.
Twitter.
Yeah, it's still Twitter. Because you can't. Then you could send a tweet, and it all kind of made sense. The language was there. It's not like X. I mean,
it's just one word. But
it doesn't. It does not roll off the tongue. That is for sure. So, Lori, great to have you with us. And boy, she's already commenting, isn't she?
She commented. We got a couple of comments from her, but we love you listening to Back to the Father.
Yeah, she said, "Love Back to the Father." That is awesome, Lori. Hopefully, the deeper into the show we get, the more people join us. So, Lori, right now it might just be you, me, and Joe. Okay, I'm not sure. I know that's a lot of pressure. Okay, so we don't want to run you off. And if I know for a fact that there are people, and you know who you are, that just kind of
You're a watcher, but not a commenter.
They just watch, and they don't want to comment. That's fine. That's all right. I prefer the people who do comment, but you can't always get everything you want. As the great sage Mick Jagger once said. What Peter, who was it that said the wealthiest philosopher in the world, Mick Jagger? Because you can't always get what you want.
Yeah,
That's kind of philosophical. Right. All right, so Lori, thanks so much. Lurkers, I like that. That sounds kind of sinister, though.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll have to take a poll on this, Lori.
If you lurk. It's just like you're like up to no good.
Yeah, something's going on.
Nobody ever lurks
for something good.
Yeah, like let's say I go pick up my daughter at school, and I'm just kind of waiting for her to get out.
Are you lurking
at
the school?
I know. I would never describe it as lurking.
Yeah,
because
I don't know.
it connotes you're like you're up to something creepy. And
definitely.
It's not good. All right, so we're gonna have to throw that one out, Lori, because we don't want to offend all of everybody. But she said, never heard of the 5 proofs. Really? Oh, wow. Cool. I mean, cool in the sense that you're about to hear about them. Okay, not cool in the sense that you don't know them. I'd be interested. I've always believed in God. Okay, well, Lori, stay tuned because we're going to get to the 5 proofs. All right, Joe, as my only person in my field of vision, you're the only person I can talk to about these things. So, do you know the 5 proofs? Do you know a couple of them?
Not a one.
Really?
I have.
Right.
This is a concept. I don't think I've ever heard of the 5 truths.
Okay, for proofs.
So even then,
you don't
guys,
even know what they're called.
Don't even know the 5 proofs. I don't.
Okay, well, how funny. Well, St. Thomas Aquinas was a very, very heavily influenced by the Greek philosopher Aristotle. Aristotle was Plato's student. Plato was Socrates' student. And Aristotle was a monotheist, unlike, whenever you think about Greek culture, they had polytheism and all these crazy gods doing all this crazy stuff. Well, Plato and Aristotle both came to the conclusion that there really has to be one God. So he was a monotheist, but his God was very different than the Christian God. But Aristotle, being the genius that he was, came up with these explanations to prove God's existence. But since his God was kind of different than the Christian God, Aquinas took those proofs, modified them, improved upon them, and then put them in the Summa Theologia. It's prima pars, question 2, article 3. So if you ever want to find, you ever kind of got the Summa lying around on your coffee table and you want to find that particular article, it's part 1, question 2, article 3, 1, 2, 3. And we will get to it, I promise you. Okay, if you're still listening, hearing about, but I got to build up to it though. So stay tuned. And Lori just said cool, Kewl. Is that like cool?
I've never heard that. I've never heard that.
I think maybe she's giving us another name because since we rejected lurkers.
Maybe.
Yeah, nobody. It's kind of like nobody wants to be called like a creep. A creep is never a good thing.
Like if I just randomly called you a creep in the office, I don't know if our relationship would be good after
like
that.
I could say, man, you're such a dog.
Yeah.
But that you might think like, yeah,
okay,
man, or you're bad, or like most of these words can be connoted to something good, but not creep and not lurker. So, all right, so let me make one other quick announcement. Now, this is cool. Now, I don't want to put any undue pressure on any particular person right now, but our crack engineers, Loney and Loney, the team of Loney and Loney set up on our show the ability to take calls. And I have this new system that was just installed about an hour ago where not only can we take calls, but I can see the calls coming in, okay? We're getting a few more people watching right now, so no pressure. All right, if you don't want to call in, no big deal. But sometimes it's nice to get that kind of interaction where people actually call in. So I'm going to throw out the phone number a couple of times, and if you want to call in, especially once we get into the topic, feel free to do so. So please write this down, 877-757-9424. Okay, 877-757-9424. And I'm looking at my screen here, and I can see when you call in. I even have the power to put you on the air and take you off. Okay. Did your parents ever say, like, I brought you into the world?
Oh, yeah. That was all the time.
Ken's the kind of guy.
But I probably deserved about 99% of it. So.
Okay. Yeah, probably so. Okay, so let's see. We do have slides, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, we're going to go to the slides. And the way we are doing this on the program these days is I used to put a lot of text on the screen where, like, let's see what Thomas says about this. And it's like, I'm going to read. And I think that's, even though I really enjoy the text, I think it's for a program like this, it's kind of hard to do it that way. So what we're going to do instead is we're just going to ask the questions. I'm gonna show the question that St. Thomas asks in the Summa, article by article, and then we're going to discuss it. And I've taught this enough times that I know what Aquinas taught, and so I think we have up on the screen right now the first graphic. Do we have it up there? Okay.
Yeah, the first graphic. I didn't put the Back to the Father one because we already shown that one.
Okay, so the first graphic, let's see, because I know Joe's got his little system of how he does this. We're going to put one up, and it's going to say St. Thomas Aquinas. Let me see.
It was the restaurant image. That was your first one.
Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. Okay, so let me see. So the restaurant image, and the reason why I did this one is we want kind of a cafe atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about you, Joe, but I love going to restaurants. I love just hanging out and talking. I tend to like deep conversations, and that's why I do shows like this, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not really that much into kind of like frivolous, did you see the Cowboy game? I mean, those kind of conversations kind of bore me, but I like talking about like stuff that really kind of matters. And so I got this picture. This is like a cafe in Paris. And so the vibe we want for this program is we're all kind of sitting around, maybe sipping on a coffee or a glass of wine or something, and we're just talking. We're talking about cool philosophical topics that kind of always go back to what St. Thomas Aquinas taught in the Summa Theologia, okay? So that's what that's about. The next graphic is a picture of the Summa, in case you've never seen a picture of the Summa. And this is what I bought. It's 5 volumes. It's pretty big, pretty dense. It took me 9 months to read the whole thing, and that was like reading it like every single day, several hours. Okay, it took me 9 months to read the whole thing. So it's pretty big, but we try to distill it, make it more. So all right, so the next slide is the one that says, treatise on the one God. Okay, questions 2 through 26. Now, last week on this program, we talked about the first question of the Summa, which is in and of itself a treatise, and it's called Treatise on Sacred Doctrine. And, we talked about why did Thomas start the Summa the way he did. And he started it with sacred doctrine for a couple of reasons. First of all, there were some philosophers in the Middle Ages who were questioning the relationship between faith and reason. There was a Muslim philosopher named I've heard it pronounced Averroes and Averroes, okay? But anyways, it's his name. Let's go with Averroes. And Averroes, even though he was a Muslim, he had been exposed to the teachings of Aristotle, and he became convinced that the philosophy of Aristotle was more reliable and more important than his Muslim faith. Okay, so when those two butted heads, he's going the direction of philosophy rather than theology, okay? Well, Aquinas, living shortly after Averroes, totally disagreed on 2 counts. He said, first of all, faith and reason can't really conflict with each other because reason and faith should always go hand in hand. They give us a different perspective on things, but they should not ever be in conflict with each other. And but Aquinas would put faith ahead of reason because faith is those things that surpass the capacity of our rational mind to come to grasp. So that was what we talked about last week, and also the fact that we need sacred doctrine because our end is supernatural and we can't get there on our own. And so if we're just born, we're not going to naturally know that there's a heaven, a hell, and a purgatory. We're not going to know there's a Trinity. We may know there's a God, but we wouldn't be able to figure out, like, I bet he's 3 persons in one God, one nature, one essence. We wouldn't know those things. Probably wouldn't know there's angels unless it was taught us. So sacred doctrine teaches us the things that surpass human reason. And Thomas says the reason we need sacred doctrine is because our end is supernatural. Okay, so that kind of summarizes what we did last week. And so, man, we got somebody else that's commenting, don't we? You see that?
I do.
Pseudo history.
I'm trying to do the thinking, but I have a feeling it's somebody who's maybe smarter than I am. But I believe in God. I believe in Jesus. I believe in you. I believe in me. But Jesus is not God, and I am not you.
Oh, okay, wait, hold on here. We may need to unpack this one a little bit, okay? This looks like, okay, I believe in God. Okay, I like that so far. I believe in Jesus. Okay, so far so good. I believe in you. I don't know who you is. I guess me? Okay, well, thank you. I believe in me. Okay, good. Jesus is not God. Okay, now we got a little problem, okay? And I am not you. Okay, this sounds like a deep thinker. So, pseudo history. we had somebody last week who jumped in, and the name, and I kind of get the feeling this might be the same person. I may be wrong, but their tag, their handle, I guess you could say, was "Our Dying Son," but they spelled son S-U-N. Okay. So whenever like Sissel or Teresita would say, "Oh, our dying son said this," it sounded really weird because it sounds like we're talking about somebody who's dying. But anyway, pseudo history. Why? Okay, let me read the rest of it. I come from a school that teaches, can you say that with less words? 9 months. Okay, 9 months. They talking about how long it took me to read the Summa. Okay, so are you saying that Aquinas maybe was just a little too wordy, and what he put in 5 volumes could have been something shorter? Is that what you're saying? All Jesus said was, think of others first before you act or speak. Now, come on, that's not all that Jesus said. I mean, Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Yeah. Jesus said, before Abraham was, I am. And when he said, I am, he was quoting God speaking to Moses. So Jesus definitely claimed to be God. I mean, that's why
it was one of the big things that it was the reason to be put to death was for the
Exactly.
blasphemy of being God.
Exactly. That was one of the charges that was put against him because he claimed to be the Son of God. And when if you look in Scripture, pseudo history, when you look in Scripture, when Jesus said, "Before Abraham was, I am," what did the Jews did? They picked up rocks immediately. They weren't like, hey, wait a second.
Hold on, what's he trying to say here? This is a man claiming to be God,
because they know that. I mean, if somebody says before Abraham was, you would say I was, okay, before, even if you're claiming to have lived before Abraham. But when you say before Abraham was, I am, in the present tense, man, every single Jew and everybody in that day would have known, man, this guy is quoting God. I mean, God revealed himself as I am. So I think definitely, without a doubt,
I would be curious. I don't know if you know this, but how many times, this is completely off topic, but how would I wonder how many times somebody has ever said "I am" before in history that they were put to death for blaspheming against God. I wouldn't know if that's something that happened regularly.
Now give me an example. You mean before,
somebody
after?
Before Jesus that was walking around and saying
"I
am"?
Okay, I see what you're saying.
As kind of
after God revealed Himself as I am, you're talking about some
Jew, some random or somebody like that.
Yeah, well, no, I don't think it ever made it into the Old Testament Scripture.
I don't remember
somebody
anything
said that. So. But that's a good question.
Because I wouldn't know if that's something that they're always on edge for.
Well, the Orthodox Jews, I think even to today, do not use the name God.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I was working in a newsroom one time, and some script came across, that we were going to kind of rip and read and for our broadcast, and it was a story that referred to God. And instead of saying G-O-D, it said G and then asterisk D, right? And I asked my news director, I said, well, I think this is the word God, but why did they do that? And my news director said, oh, that's an Orthodox Jew, because they can't spell, they cannot say or write the word God. They think it's I think. I think it's kind of cool because it's so reverent.
I don't think there's nothing wrong with that at all.
Yeah, it wouldn't be wrong from our tradition, but the Orthodox Jews, they just think the word is so holy that they don't want to say it and they don't want to write it. But all right, boy, I'm going off on a lot of tangents here. Okay, so and pseudo history is on a roll here.
Yeah.
Let's see. So, anyways, I think a proper reading of Scripture would say that Jesus did claim to be God. Jesus never wrote anything down. That's true. Either did Socrates, by the way. Interestingly, a lot of the sages didn't write anything down. They just I guess they just assumed somebody else was going to come along and do it for them. The Bible is full of secondhand information. Well, that's true, but we also believe that it's the primary author of Scripture is the Holy Spirit. So Luke said, Jesus said. Yeah, okay, I understand what you're saying. You're saying that that Jesus didn't write it down himself, but something tells me pseudo-history that even if Jesus did write it down, you'd still be a skeptic.
Well, because then it's how do we know he wrote it down?
Exactly. You're always there's. And again, I'm not trying to rag on pseudo-history. I'm glad he's here. He's asking some good questions, but there's always going to be a little bit of a leap of faith because you could say, how do we even know that Jesus ever lived or that there was any such thing as St. Paul or St. Luke? So you're always going to have some degree of there's some things I'm just going to take on faith and
take on a supernatural faith, or even just nobody saw. Julius Caesar was so long ago that could have been completely fake, but we believe certain records and everything like that.
Yeah. So I don't know about over on Facebook if anybody's commenting. Are you able to?
I'm seeing it.
It seems like YouTube is where people seem to congregate. So let me get into the subject matter here because. Yeah. This is pretty cool stuff. Okay, I've got too many PowerPoints opened up here on my end. I'm getting confused with them. So, all right, we're gonna go to let's see. Do you have the slide?
The treatise on the one God.
Yeah, let me see. I got to open mine up here because I lost it. So we're gonna go to the treatise on the one God. And I mentioned how question 1 was its own treatise on sacred doctrine. Now, the treatise on the one God, and this is really interesting because you've entered now into a part of the Summa, 25 questions, where St. Thomas Aquinas is going to focus on God. And he wants to start the Summa about God because really, if you don't lay the foundation of who that God exists, who God is, what God is, the Blessed Trinity, and that kind of thing, then the rest of the Summa is going to really make much sense because the whole Summa is about our coming from God and back to God. In fact, if you look at that next slide, it says Exodus and Reditus. Do you see that one?
Yes.
Exodus and Reditus. And what that means, and I didn't make this up, this is something that scholars of the Summa have talked about for many years, is that there is a certain kind of formula or the way the Summa is designed. It begins with God and it ends with God, okay? And the rest of the Summa is about our return to God. And that's why I love, some people don't like this analogy, but the boomerang. Mm-hmm. Have we talked about the boomerang before? Okay. Okay, so let me ask you this, Joe, and everybody who's out there who's watching, what's a boomerang is made for what purpose?
It's to go out and then come back. It was as a hunting tool, but it's to go out and then come back.
You're supposed to like hit a bird or something, or how is it a hunting tool?
I thought it was something for like small animals in Australia.
Like, do you like hit them with it and then it comes back to you?
That's what my understanding was. I didn't think it was like
the boomerang would hit it and then still come
stop.
back.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Again, I am completely. I'm not up to date on my Aussie lore, guys. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but at any rate, nowadays most people you do it for fun. I don't know that I've ever been able to like actually throw a boomerang up when it like came right back to me. But the point is that it's designed to do that. And so a boomerang is designed to be thrown out and then come back. Now, some people don't like this idea that God throws us out because that sounds kind of weird. But the truth is, we are born into a world that we didn't ask to come into. Mm-hmm. Okay, there's a philosopher named Martin Heidegger that writes a lot about this. He actually calls it thrownness in German, is that we're like, hey, here we are, So in a sense, if you can imagine, we're kind of put into the world, we're thrown into the world, but the Reditus part of the Exodus and Reditus is that we are being drawn back to God. And the primary way that we're being drawn back to God is through our experience with goodness. Because St. Thomas Aquinas would say that everything good in the world is drawing us to God because God is goodness itself, okay? Now, the other thing that's interesting about this is that he also would claim that anything that exists is good. So if you put those two together, that means every single thing in the world that we experience is drawing us to God. And this is the most fundamental way that studying the Summa has changed me, is that like when I see a tree, when I see a bird, when I see a cricket, when I see Joe Loney, I mean, seriously, I connect every single bit of it to God. And that's how I generally am a pretty like enthusiastic, optimistic person. And how can you not be if every single thing you see and everything you experience in the world reminds you of God? Even the mosquitoes, people are like, how could a mosquito possibly be good? But if it exists, it's good. Anything that has existence is good. You got to find the good in it, right? Mm-hmm. As you're slapping it off your arm and killing it in a burst of blood, right? You're saying that's good, right? Okay, so pseudo history. I'm going to get back to you in just a moment. Thank you for your comments, by the way. Appreciate you putting all those in there. But okay, so that's that. Now, this second question, the Summa, about the existence of God, only has 3 articles. If you remember last week, the first question of the Summa had 10 articles about sacred doctrine. So Thomas, kind of getting started with the Summa, had a lot in his mind with that question about sacred doctrine. But the existence of God only has 3 articles, and we're going to go through these. So this is where I really want you to comment, and Joe, you jump in anytime you want to, all right? So the first one, I don't know if, let me see if you've put that up there yet, but if you can put that next slide up there, it says Article 1, and it says, is whether the existence of God is self-evident. And there's a picture there. I subscribe to this subscription to Canva, and I put in a picture of Anselm. Okay, and this is the only picture that came of Anselm. But St. Anselm was I think, 11th or 12th century Christian saint and also bishop. And he came up with something called the ontological argument. Okay, so I'm guessing, Joe, you have not heard of the ontological argument, okay? So ontology is the study of being, which being and existence is the same thing, okay? So ontology just is the study of existence, the study of being, okay? And St. Anselm came up with the ontological argument, okay? That's why I have a picture of him here. What we mean by the existence of God being self-evident means would we be able to know that there's a God outside of our experience of the world? Okay, so if you were not able to see or hear or smell or taste or touch, and all you had to go with was reason, okay, your cognitive ability with no support from your senses or your experience of the world, would you be able to ascertain that there's a God? Okay, that's what this question is saying. In philosophical terms, they call it a priori knowledge. All right, like people would say, would you know that 2 + 2 is 4 without seeing 2 apples and 2 apples and being told that those are 4 apples? Okay, do you have to have a visual, or can you in your very mind conceive of 2 + 2 is 4 without any kind of visual, sensual? Okay, do you think you can?
I think you can.
Okay, so that would be a priori. That means you don't have to have the support of sense experience. You don't have to have experience, okay? But what about the existence of God? Now, Thomas is going to say that the existence of God is not self-evident. Okay, he's going to say we have to have experience of the world in order to know there's a God. Thomas also doesn't believe that you have to have divine revelation to believe that God exists. He thinks you can come to the belief in God's existence just through natural reason. Okay, he says, we wouldn't know a lot about God. We wouldn't know He's a Trinity. We wouldn't know that there are other things about God, but we could know that there is a God just through the experience of our life. Okay. So let me stop there for a second. And wow, pseudo history is on a roll, isn't he?
Yes.
I'm all about faith. Okay. Now, so pseudo history appears to be saying he or she. Why am I thinking pseudo history is a guy? I don't you kind of get the impression?
I do.
Yeah.
And
I don't know. To correct me if I'm wrong, pseudo history, but I don't know. I just for some reason I'm just. I don't know. I don't know anything about you, really, but tell me if I don't know, because I don't know. I'm guessing pseudo history is not your birth name.
Guess not.
But okay, faith. Okay, faith isn't dependent on miracles, and Jesus doesn't need to be God for me to believe in Him. Okay, well, I mean, apparently you believe in Jesus, that He lived, and He was a great man. Some of the other, like the Muslims believe Jesus lived. The Muslims believe Jesus was a prophet, but they just don't believe He's God, right? Life is self-evident. It's all about proof of God I need. Okay, well, we're going to get to that. Pseudo-history, have you heard of the 5 proofs for the existence of God? Lori hasn't. Joe hasn't. Can you tell me that? Have you heard of the 5 proofs? I know not how it will end, no more than how it began. This guy's deep, isn't he?
Wow, some
that's
thinking.
great. That's great pH. But okay, what did Lori say? That's great. Is great pH. Oh, pseudo history. Okay, that's who she was referring to.
Yeah.
But how do you show that the others who fit? Okay, good. They're getting into their own little conversation on the chat.
Like
That's good. Okay. All right, Lori. Thank you. I'm glad you're still with us. Okay, so. Let me tell you about the ontological argument. You just tell me if this makes sense, okay? Now, you guys put your thinking caps on, because this you got to really pay attention to kind of follow this. What Anselm said was, if we're going to describe God, the way that most people could come to understand God would be that which nothing greater can be conceived. All right. So that is how Anselm described God. So he figured, well, if there is a God, he is going to be the greatest thing that we possibly could imagine. Now, can you buy that, Joe? I mean, that notion. I mean, is that okay? So
the topmost or the most important.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, you're not going to think like the God's like comes in third place. There's two, because if there's two ahead of him, well,
then that would be God.
That would be God. Yeah. So so Anselm says God is that which nothing greater could be conceived. That's his formula and his definition of God. But then he takes it another step, and he said, isn't something real better than just something in the mind? So, for example, would you rather have a real pizza right now in front of you, Joe, or would you rather have the idea of a pizza in your mind?
Well, you'd obviously want the real thing because that would actually benefit me instead of having some thought exercise or something like that.
And I know you don't have kids yet, but if I went to my 11-year-old son and I said, Patrick, would you rather have a candy bar or the idea of a candy bar in your mind? Say to my teenage daughter, would you rather have a brand new Porsche or the idea of a Porsche in your mind? You get the idea, right? Okay. So now what Anselm has says is, he says, if the idea of God is that which nothing greater can be conceived, well, then certainly the reality of that idea would be greater than just the idea. So he said, therefore, God exists, not just as an idea in our mind, but in reality. Okay, some people like it, some people don't. But at any rate, it's one of the most famous kind of arguments for the existence of God. It's called the ontological argument because it has to do with God's existence, okay? Interestingly, Anselm never called it the ontological argument. It wasn't until the 18th century when another philosopher by the name of Immanuel Kant came along, and he called it the ontological argument. And so for the last 200-300 years, it's been called the ontological argument, thanks to Immanuel Kant, who was a pretty brilliant philosopher in his own right. All right, so Thomas doesn't particularly like the ontological argument. The other folks who thought that God's existence was self-evident were the Platonists, including Plato. Plato was very much on reason rather than experience. But when Aristotle came along, Aristotle said, no, you can't just rely on reason. You have to rely on our experience, okay? And so I guess the thing that you should know here is that Thomas does not believe in the ontological argument, and he doesn't believe that God's existence is self-evident. All right, so if it's not self-evident, what's the other option? Okay, so the next article, Article 2, Thomas says, well, can it be demonstrated that God exists? All right, so I have this picture up there.
Got you there.
Now, if you're at the bowling alley and you, in a snap moment, see this image, in your mind, it happens, right? A ball hits pins and the pins go flying. Looks like it's probably going to be a strike. It looks like they probably got all of them right. Now, in your mind, you assume that somebody threw that ball down. What do they call it? An alley? Is
the alley? Yeah.
Down the alley. Okay, so what you're doing here is you're seeing an effect. The effect is the ball hitting the pins and the pins going everywhere. And because you see the effect, you can assume the cause. Last night, I was at a 4th of July event, and at one point, my wife said, oh, look, there's a drone up there. Mm-hmm. So I look up, like everybody else, and you see the drone. Well, the natural thing when you see a drone is you're wondering, who's controlling it?
Yeah, where is
so then your mind, your eyes go down to the ground level and you're looking around. Why? Because you see an effect and you assume a cause, right? That's probably the best example. Or like one of those airplanes that you see up in and somebody's controlling it remotely. I remember recently going by and seeing the effects of a building that had caught on fire, and it was all charred and it had been entirely destroyed. And, and in my mind, I may not have said it audibly, but I think, oh, there was a fire, right? Because at least this doesn't just happen. So what Thomas is going to argue in this second article is that by our experience with the created world And when we see sunrises and sunsets and babies and daffodils and, butterflies and crickets, we don't think that they just popped out of the blue, that we assume that there is some cause, there's somewhere that they came from, and therefore we can demonstrate in our mind that there's a God. In Romans 1:20, God said, I think I've got this right. I'm paraphrasing, I think, a little bit, but the invisible attributes of God can be made known by those things that he has made. And then he says, therefore, they have no excuse. Who doesn't have an excuse? The unbelievers. St. Paul is making the same argument that Thomas would later on, is that anybody who looks at the world around them and is honest with themselves has got to come to the conclusion that there's a God behind this. Okay, so that's the argument based on demonstration, all right? And I am going to take a little break, take a sip of water, and you guys talk amongst yourselves. That we're getting a lot of comments from Lori and Pseudo History. Anything jump out? Because, boy, there's so many from Pseudo History.
Yeah, I think the kind of towards the end where he talks about if you want to know God, do the right thing and sacrifice and all in that hour and have a little faith, and all you need is the mustard seed of faith. I think that is a good thing to do. But I think God gave us the ability to do more than just faith as well. I think faith is obviously the most important. It's the foundation, but he gave us the ability to rationalize and to think and to kind of prove to ourselves more than other people. And then there are some that aren't going to believe it, that need that help. And that's where he would bring someone like St. Thomas Aquinas as to give somebody a rationalization, let them study it, let them learn it from that man.
Yeah, because some people like to use their reason, and that's why, you're right. It's kind of like, the 1-2 punch is that if somebody is told about God and they just assent to it through faith and that, that's all they need, great.
That's all anyone. That's all
awesome.
you need.
But then when God gives us the ability to reason, like you're saying, and then that supports the faith that we believe anyways without a lot of proof, then, it reinforces it. And so I think St. Thomas Aquinas, with these proofs for the existence of God, are reinforcing a faith that we could have that God exists based on what we've been taught. But then we can also say, you know what, I like this because it conforms to reason as well.
I mean, we do that with the people learn different ways. Some people learn hands-on. Some people learn that way. If everyone learned just by understanding and reason, then that's how everyone would learn. But it's just not there. So some people need something extra, and I think that's what God is giving to us. He made us that way.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. I think it's interesting that Pseudo History said, if you want to know God, do the right thing. Sacrifice all in that hour and have a little faith. Okay, so I would challenge, I'm going to call him PH, like Lori did. Okay, PH, to do the right thing. Okay, the right thing implies that there is an objective order, because some people might say, well, to me, the right thing is, cheating on my spouse and, cheating on my taxes and going into stores and stealing things. That's what I think is the right thing, because I'm making up my own morals, right?
What's the fight against that? You would. Well, if you just believe it's the right thing, then that would be the right thing, right?
Yeah. Or is there something? Is there an objective truth? Okay. Is there an objective truth that, like the 10 Commandments? These are natural law. The 10 Commandments: do not kill, do not bear false witness, do not covet your neighbor's wife. These are things that are part of a natural law. But then you got to ask yourself, well, who's the author of a natural law? Why did it get instilled in us in the first place? Unless there is some objective author of this objective natural law. And St. Thomas and people who believe in the Christian tradition would say, well, that's God, right? So I think by saying, and I know pseudo history isn't really arguing against the existence of God. It's more, I think, about Jesus, right? Is what he's having the hard time coming to the conclusion that Jesus is God. We all know the difference between good and evil. Okay, but why do we? That's instilled in us. Okay, that would be kind of what we're talking about a priori. innate knowledge of good and evil. But I think a lot of people would disagree with that. They'd say that there is no standard, kind of inflexible, absolute,
rigid. Rigid. It would all be cultural based, society based, and everything like that. Because I don't think any society truly believes they're doing something wrong. Mm-hmm. Even like the Aztecs sacrificing humans at the temple believe they're doing the right thing.
Yeah. Or the guys that flew the planes into the
they
Twin Towers.
Believe they were doing the right thing.
They do it in the name of their religion, and they're doing the right thing. But I think what PH is saying is that deep down, we know that that's not the right thing. And I can't imagine flying a plane into a building and killing, 3,000, 4,000 people, however many it was, that you walk away saying, oh, I did something really great. But, I don't know. It's an interesting question.
His comment, the Ten Commandments is a good place to start. I think it is. But I think that that's a great foundation. And I think that we need to build more on a foundation.
Yeah.
I don't believe it is the final product. I think that is, if it deviates from it, then it's bad. Mm-hmm. But if it's from there and it's built from that ground, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. You ever heard about the ordering of the Ten Commandments, where the first three have to do with our relationship with God?
Yeah. Then it was the family.
Yeah. Well, your parents. Yeah. And then everybody else.
Then society.
Yeah. And it's so well ordered the way that it's structured. So, all right. So you've waited long enough, and now we want to talk about the famous 5 proofs for the existence of God. Okay. And as I mentioned before, this is Article 3, Question 2, Prima Pars, first part of the Summa. So if you ever want to find it, 1, 2, 3 in the Summa. And I think, I don't know if Thomas did that intentionally, but I think it's kind of cool that that's the way it is. So the cool thing about the 5 proofs for the existence of God is that Thomas does not rely on faith. He does not rely on sacred scripture or, divine revelation, sacred doctrine. Everything is based on observation of the world. And so I'm going to go through these one at a time. And since I know Lori and Joe, and I don't know if PH weighed in on this or not about whether he knows he's ever heard of these 5 proofs or not, but I'm just going to go on the assumption that nobody that's in this conversation right now has ever heard of these, because nobody has told me that they have. The first one is based on the first mover. And what Thomas says, and just kind of paraphrasing the paragraph in the Summa, is he says that we observe motion in the world. Mm-hmm. Okay, things are moving. Okay, we can look out our window here and see all these things, birds and cars and the wind, the trees moving from the wind, and there's clearly movement. I'm moving,
Yeah.
And but then he says, in order for something to move, something else had to move it. Okay, and I think that's one of Newton's laws.
It's object in motion will be at rest unless acted upon by a force or.
The laws of dynamics or something like that. All right, but what Thomas says is, okay, so if everything that moves had to be moved, and that thing moved had to be moved, which had to be moved, which had to be moved, which had to be moved, and he says, and this is where you can weigh in on this, Joe. He says, well, you can't go back to infinity because it doesn't make sense that you just keep on going back to at some point, what Thomas says is there had to be something that breaks the rule, and that thing had to be unmoved. Mm-hmm. And so he says there had to be an initial unmoved mover that got the whole thing to start in the first place. Mm-hmm. And he says that unmoved mover is God. All right, so that's the first argument. The second one is very, very similar to it, and it's the uncaused cause. Mm-hmm. It's almost identical, but instead of movement, you're talking about causality. That everything that happens is an effect, like I talked about the burning building, mm-hmm. or the bowling balls flying through the air. These were an effect. It had to have a cause. Well, that cause had to have a cause. That cause had to have a cause. And then and again, he doesn't think you can just go back forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever just into infinity. But there had to be something that was the uncaused cause. Okay, so that's number 2. Mm-hmm. Let's see. Pseudo history, all actions have consequences. Okay, very good. And Lori, if you're still watching, I'd love to know what you think about these. And also, do me a favor, including you, Joe, tell me which of these you find most convincing when I finish them all, and then also if there's any that you think like, I don't know, I don't think that makes sense.
Yeah.
Or it doesn't jive with me. The third one is related but a little bit different. And what he says is that everything in the world that exists only possibly, which means that, first of all, let's just say Joe Loney or the bird that just flew by our building, okay? There was a time when Joe Loney did not exist, and there was a time when that bird did not exist. There was a time when I didn't exist, and this building didn't exist, and that,
country,
yeah. So that means that they are only possible but not necessary. But he says that, okay, so if everything in the created world is only possible but not necessary, the second step is, but they do exist, so they're here. So they weren't necessary, they're only possible, but they did exist. So that means that there could conceivably have been a time when none of this existed at all, because none of it's necessary, it's all only possible.
Yeah.
And he said that means that there is a requirement that something has to be necessary, because otherwise nothing would have ever come to be. Because if everything in the world is only possible and not necessary, then there's nothing that would have started it in the first place. So you see it's kind of an extension of the first two, but just a different way of looking at it.
They're all very similar. I've heard it like the cake baker. Like he eventually the cake was not there, the ingredients were put together, and then the cake was made. And then it just kind of goes back to that. I find that the third one is better. The other ones, I feel like, can be pushed out a little bit more, and you can kind of just keep going back and back and back and back a little easier than the one.
The possibility and necessity. Yeah. That's okay. So
I think that's a better argument for me.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So number 4 is has to do with what he calls degrees of perfection. He says that in the world, we notice that things have degrees of perfection. Some things are smarter. I mean, some people are smarter. Some things are prettier. Some things are taller. Some things are, more athletic. Some things there's all these degrees of perfection. Sometimes you'll see a sunset that just looks perfect, or then the next day, oh, that one's even better. And so we're constantly judging things on degrees of perfection. So then he says, well, in order for anything to have any kind of, there has to be like a judgment about degrees of perfection, there has to be something on the top. I use the example in my classes that if you were a student of mine, Joe, and I handed you back a test and you got an 82, the only way that 82 makes sense is if there is a top level, okay?
If there's 100.
Yeah, because if I just gave you an 82 and you don't know what it's out of.
Is that good or bad?
Yeah, if it was 82 out of 1,000, well, that's a horrible grade.
If I'm 82 out of 82, then I'm perfect.
Right. So, so you logically, okay, if I said, hey, you got an 82 on your test.
Yeah.
Well, you might say, oh, out of what? You assume 100 because, we're on a percent basis. But unless you know that top, nothing makes sense.
Yeah.
So when you say, my in your case, my fiance is the most beautiful. Is the most beautiful woman I've ever met. Well, okay. But you have to have some image of like what is the highest beauty? Because then there's all these other degrees of beauty. But in order to put her on some kind of scale of beauty, there has to be something at the top. And so what Thomas is saying is that, okay, if you have all these things, like you say, like who's the smartest person? Well, Albert Einstein, but the only reason Albert Einstein would be smarter than me or Joe would be if there's some kind of threshold or something at the top that we may not know who the person is, but there's something that we're judging it by, right? And so Aquinas is saying, okay, we have all these degrees of perfection. It makes sense that some being has all of the perfections, that all of these other perfections kind of participate in some ultimate perfection, which, surprise, surprise, is God.
Yes.
Okay, so that's the degrees of perfection. And then the last one is personally my favorite. I don't want I don't want to persuade the jury here, but you guys can pick whichever one you like, or maybe you don't like any of them. The fifth one is called governance of the world. And what he says is, we observe in the world that there are a lot of creatures that lack intelligence, but they still act for an end. Mm-hmm. Like, for example, you see ants in this very organized community building a mound.
Yeah.
Or a friend of mine has he has bees in his backyard.
Yeah, the beehives.
And he was telling me, I don't know if you know about this, but the way they kind of select a queen, and they basically kind of, because when a beehive has to have a queen.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they're just lost, right? And they actually kind of make a queen. They have to decide which of the females are going to, and the queen is the only one that reproduces, right? The other females don't reproduce. Yeah. So it's this very organized, structured society, but these things don't have intellect.
Yeah.
How are they knowing to do this? And when a salmon is going upstream to spawn, or a beaver's building a dam, or a bird's building a nest, or the ducks are flying south, and all this stuff is happening, or the photosynthesis process, or composting, or all these things, the water cycle, all this stuff is happening around us without any intelligence, so to speak. No, ducks don't have intelligence, the ants don't, the beavers don't, right? But they're still doing things for an end. They're still doing things for the best end. So this is what's called the teleological argument. It means that there is some being, some intelligent force that's kind of pushing everything along and to the right end. So everything's kind of heading towards the best end. And since it lacks intelligence, there has to be an intelligence behind it. All right. So when I learned the teleological argument, this fifth proof of the existence of God, it changed everything, because now whenever I see these processes in nature, like an ant mound, or the bees, or the ducks flying south, I immediately think of God. Where a person who hasn't had this kind of training might just say, "Oh, okay,
they just do it.
They just do it." Okay, that's what they say. It's instinct, right? But then the question is, well, who's the author of instinct? Okay, who planted the instinct in them? And that's the teleological governance argument. So
I think we definitely need to go back to the Instagram comments.
There's Instagram comments?
No, sorry, the YouTube comments.
Okay.
The 7 out of 10 commandments will get you into heaven. God doesn't believe in perfection. That's of the world. God does not expect us to be perfect, but if you just say I only have to follow 7 out of 10,
the last, is he talking about numbers 7 through 10?
I think it's just 7 out of 10.
Now, so which 3 are you? You're probably kicking out the first 3, perhaps.
I'm not sure, but again, doesn't care if you got a C in chemistry, sure, but he wants you to do your best at it.
And he said, okay, and again, I'm not making fun of you. I'm laughing with you, PH, but he said, I'm not perfect, Jesus is. But he had denied Jesus' divinity. And so if Jesus is perfect, that would, because didn't you, PH, say that Jesus, you struggle with Jesus' divinity, right? Or that you said Jesus didn't claim to be divine. But could you be perfect and just be a human being? I mean, I don't know any perfect human beings. I believe me, I'm so far from perfect. But man, PH has got us putting on the old thinking cap today.
I think the 7 out of 10 really sticks to me, because this is one of the great things about being Catholic, right? It's I know I'm a sinner, and I can go and confess. I can try to do my best, but you're gonna fall. You're gonna do things, and you're gonna struggle at something. The perfect human being.
Yeah.
So you're still saying that Jesus is not divine.
Okay. I don't know. Maybe we've changed his mind. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe.
All right, PH, let us know where you are with this. The perfect human being. Okay. So I guess, and even the word perfect is so funny, because I might say, I've got the perfect wife or the perfect children. Like, no, you don't. I mean, because nobody's perfect, or like, got the perfect dog. I mean, no, because that dog just peed on your rug.
Yeah, something is.
Yeah, that's not perfect.
Now, you may not recognize it or want to see it, because it's your dog.
Yeah, but yeah. So anyways, all right. So those are the proofs for the existence of God. Now it's time as we close up the show. It's already 2:00. Joe, do you have a favorite? And PH and Lori and anybody else out there, do you have a favorite or any of them you thought was particularly compelling?
The third one I think is probably the most compelling.
Possibility, necessity. Yeah. Okay. So Joe likes the third one, possibility, necessity. And let's see. I know I'm a sinner. I fall, but I confess, and with repentance I am forgiven. Okay, Lori said the same. Yeah, kind of similar to what you're saying.
Yeah.
Jesus was a saint. Jesus was a saint.
He was a lot more.
More than a saint. Yeah. Carlo Acutis is going to be a saint next year, right? But Carlo Acutis was not a perfect person, and saints are not perfect. But man, pseudo history. The virgin sacrifice. Oh man! Now, pseudo history. Tell me one thing. I'll be honest, okay? Because you're an enigma. Well, are you the same person that last week was our dying son? Tell me that, okay? Just or because you write like our dying son did last week. I think you just gave yourself a new name. That's my guess. Okay, Lori, did you have a favorite of the five? Lori's like, oh man, I should have paid better attention. I shouldn't have gone to my refrigerator to get that snack. I wasn't paying attention.
And I think we have a Paula on Facebook. I think Mary would be the closest we can get to a perfect. But
you know who Paula is?
I do know who Paula is. But I think the perfect one for that one would be she was given perfection without the stain of sin on her.
Yeah.
But she was as perfect as a human could ever be, but nobody could be as perfect as she was.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing, and again, I say this only because I know it's true. I don't mean to, like, obviously, I'm not going to ever disparage the Blessed Mother, but the Blessed Mother could have, like, tripped over the steps, or she could have, hit her head on the top of it. I mean, by being perfect, it means she was sinless, but that doesn't mean...
ever burn bread.
Yeah, right. Yeah. She exactly. She could have left the Avedon longer than So even that perfect word, and again, that I think would have applied to Jesus. I hate even saying it, but I mean, Jesus was perfect, but that doesn't mean he couldn't have. Gosh, Jesus could have tripped, or he could have done something. I mean. Yeah. Yeah, there's always some. He
was human.
He was perfect in the things that were most important to be perfect in, without sin.
Yeah.
But you think about it. He was a Joseph's apprentice, and does that mean every single piece of artwork that he made was absolutely perfect, and there was never a flaw, and he hit every nail in with one stroke. I mean, like every single. So, anyways, but he was without sin and perfect in that regard. So, all right. Well, that is going to just about do it. I think Lori said she liked Pseudo History said he liked the first one best. Pseudo History says he goes by Lloyd's of London. My full name is Lloyd William Carrington Parker Peterson. I don't believe that. I don't believe that for a second. What if he's been telling the truth, though? I'm all about the blood. Oh, my goodness.
We go down a couple different rabbit holes. With,
right. I know pseudo history. You've made the show very interesting. Paula, thank you for your comments. Lori Powell, thank you for your comments. And everybody watching, even you lurkers out there, okay? Because we know there are some. Maybe that's going to be the name. Okay, we're gonna
put it on our shirts.
Yeah,
we're gonna put that out there.
We love lurkers. We love lurkers. All right. Well, Joe, thanks so much. Pray for Sissel. She's out today. She had a little mishap at her 4th of July party yesterday, and she had to go see the doctor. Nothing, I don't think, terribly serious, but wasn't able to come into work today. I was a little hobbled, but God willing, she'll be back next week. Yeah, next week we may not have a show because it's the day after our Summer Speaker Series event, but we'll send out an email. And God willing, we will see all of you amazing, insightful people for the next program, whenever that will be. In the meantime, don't forget that we have the Summer Speaker Series event. And let's see, Lloyd, William, Carrington, Parker, Peterson, you are invited, along with everybody else, to the Summer Speaker Series event next Thursday at the Frontiers of Flight Museum with Dr. Ray Grandi. Tickets are $75. And if you watch this program and you show up, come up and say, you know what? I am a viewer of Back to the Father, and we would love to have you with us next Thursday. Okay? Thanks again, Joe. Appreciate it. And God bless you, everybody. And we'll see you for the next Back to the Father. Have a great weekend.
Thanks for joining us for Back to the Father. And don't forget, the glory of God is the human person fully alive. If you have comments about the show, email Dave Palmer at grnonline.com.